Happy solstice, everyone. I hope you are enjoying and celebrating the sun today. Whether you are experiencing the sun at its greatest height and our longest day of the year at the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, or if you're down under in the southern hemisphere experiencing the winter solstice, I'm going to be giving you an overview of the season ahead. So, the astrology from about the third week of June until the third week of September. A lot of my videos are more detailed and thorough about specific periods of time, shorter periods of time than a whole season. But there is so much happening in this season ahead that I thought it would be worthwhile just to go through some of the major turning points and plot points in our stories. As I've talked about many times, this year of 2025 has a feeling of a new era opening up. And this season ahead, this summer, is a point where we will get this feeling of this new era fully awakening, mainly because of the entrance of Uranus into Gemini. But there are numerous other significant parts of this storyline. But that entrance of Uranus into Gemini that will happen in the beginning of July is the final piece of the big configuration taking shape in these years ahead that we have not fully experienced yet. And so, while there will be all sorts of new movements unleashed and even more accelerating change happening, if you can believe that, because Saturn will come back to Pisces in the beginning of September, and then later in the year, Neptune will come back to Pisces, and Uranus will also move from Gemini back into Taurus. This new movement that comes in is not going to fully continue in these signs. And so, in our personal lives, there will be some sort of return to the life topics and themes that we were previously dealing with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces and Uranus and Taurus. That does not mean in the world that things will be going back to the way they used to be, because we really are fully entering into this new era of time. But there will still be a return back to some of these themes and topics in our life stories that we had previously been dealing with before we fully in 2026 lock into this period of time with Saturn and Neptune in Aries and Uranus in Gemini. So let's get into it. The reason the solstice has such a potent quality of launching us into a new era is because there were two critical aspects formed within the week leading up to the solstice that are very much in the background, influencing our entrance into this new season. The principal primary one was the square aspect formed between Jupiter in Cancer with Saturn in Aries on June 15th. This was followed a few days later by Jupiter also forming an exact square aspect with Neptune in Aries. But the one that was most important of all is a square between Jupiter and Saturn, because Jupiter and Saturn for many, many centuries have been the two planets that very much govern different eras and epochs of time. And this square aspect between them was the third and final square aspect that we were going to experience in this sequence. The square aspect between them, you could think about it a little bit like a first quarter waxing square moon. That is a critical turning point in the lunar cycle every month. But this is a critical turning point in the 20-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. And so this week leading into the solstice was marking this critical turning point in collective changes going on all around the world and new trends coming in. It was also really important because Jupiter and Saturn had moved into cardinal signs. The previous square aspects happened with Jupiter in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces. And these cardinal signs go with fast moving new events coming in with great speed. And this, in fact, did happen this week with greater warfare breaking out and all sorts of different unrest and major storylines taking off with tremendous speed. The reason this is also such a big deal is because Saturn and Neptune are coming together at the end of their cycle. And so it wasn't just Jupiter forming a square aspect with Saturn, it was also Jupiter forming a square aspect with Neptune. And so while the Jupiter Saturn piece takes us back to the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in December 2020, that fully launched us into this 200-year era of Jupiter Saturn conjunctions happening in air signs. The square between Jupiter and Neptune takes us back to the Jupiter Neptune conjunction that formed in April of 2022. The Jupiter Saturn conjunction in 2020 is the real heavy influence here that we are coming into a critical turning point with, because this is the one that really launched us into the much larger epochal types of systemic changes that we are still adjusting to. But it's also important to keep in mind what was happening in your life as we came into this Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces in April 2022, while we were still at an earlier phase of coming into relationship with and adjusting and making big changes in our life in relation to those great Jupiter and Saturn changes that came in during 2020. This conjunction between Jupiter and Neptune at its best could have brought in some sort of inspiration or new life or new sense of life direction or new dream for you to pursue and develop. And so, what's also really important to keep in mind is that we're now also at a critical turning point of whatever this dream or inspiration was for you. It also could have led to things dissolving or things that had to be let go from your life at this time if that Neptunian influence was a little bit stronger for you. And so you're also going to be at a critical turning point related to that as we come into this solstice. And so these are the reasons why this Cancer solstice chart is so powerful. We have the Sun and Jupiter forming a square aspect with Saturn and Neptune. One of the reasons why Neptune in Aries is such a big deal is because in these years ahead, with Neptune at the very beginning of Aries, all of these major ingress charts, when the sun goes into Cancer or the sun goes into Libra or Capricorn or Aries, are going to have major aspects between the sun and Neptune, which means Neptune in Aries is going to have a really strong influence on all the seasonal ingress charts that we use to forecast a period ahead. And this one is maybe the most powerful of all, just because this is the one that really announces us entering this time period of Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune, as I've talked about, go with great changes in collective reality and how we all perceive reality. And while it can go with great disillusionment, it can go with great collective delusion, it can go with great inquisitions and persecutions and oppression, all the kinds of things that we're definitely seeing going on in current events right now. It can also coincide with a great spiritual awakening, and it can be a time to really forge greater purpose. And within the great change and within the great dissolution, really go after what it is you really want to create and bring into being with your life. And so that is the real power here at this solstice chart. There's hard aspects involved. You know, that solstice sun with Jupiter has a square with Saturn and Neptune. That square with Saturn in particular could be bringing up certain fears and anxieties, or really bringing in some delays or obstacles. But the main thing here is just to make a plan, face the reality you're facing, and figure out how to make it happen, because this is a time of really great vision. Now, this particular chart is set for Washington, D.C., and so it could be used to forecast what will happen in the United States of America in particular. And we can see that it is going to be an incredibly eventful time of great unrest and change with Pluto and Aquarius on the ascendant, Uranus and Taurus on the IC. The thing that's also going on in this chart is that Moon in Taurus applying to a square with Pluto. That's going to be going on everywhere in the world. And so this again shows the incredible change that's coming in. But that moon in Taurus is also forming a harmonious sextile aspect with the sun and with Jupiter. And so I feel like this aspect within the solstice chart really shows us the two sides that we're going to be dealing with during this season. On one hand, there is just going to be incredible unrest and turbulence. There are already great wars breaking out with more intensity. Hopefully, we can pray and hope that these wars do not continue to accelerate with even greater devastation than they already are in terms of turning into even longer term wars, bringing in more and more nations and people. And hopefully, there can be some sort of ceasefire or something else worked out. But we know from looking at this chart, from looking at the astrology, there is going to be all sorts of difficult dissolution, difficult violence, change. Things are breaking up, things are breaking through. But that also means on personal levels, there will be opportunities for new growth and for new development. And so we are just going to have to find our way through all of this turbulence and through this disruption and focus on building our communities, forming fellowship and alliances with those who share our values and our goals, and working to build whatever it is we want to build and create step by step, working to protect the people that are important to us and bring about the change that we want to see. It's going to be an incredibly dramatic time. And then, less than a week after the solstice, on June 25th, we have the new moon in Cancer. On the positive side, this new moon in Cancer is one of the most hopeful of the year. And so, although, like I'm saying, there will be some very turbulent, disruptive astrology that we have to navigate in the season ahead, there is this great fortunate event of this beautiful new moon in Cancer. It is the home of the moon, it is the exaltation of Jupiter. Jupiter will also have just begun a new cycle with the sun on the day before. And so it's a new Jupiter, it's a new moon. There's a nice sextile with Mars. There is this opportunity of hope and vision and setting intentions for what you really want to bring about in this season ahead. Now, the new moon as well as Jupiter are also still experiencing this square from Saturn and Neptune. And so we very much have Saturn and Neptune and their influence very strong in this new moon, but they are all separating from Saturn and Neptune. And so that brings in this sense of us beginning this season, although we are having to reckon with that Saturn element. There is this new sense of how do we deal with this? How do we deal with whatever it is we're facing? And how do we retain our hope and our dream and our inspiration and our capacity to imagine something different and fight and persist and create what it is we do want to bring into the world? One of the things about this summer is that things just continue to change, and there really isn't a period this summer where things get easy or mellow or anything like that. And so I really, again, encourage you to set the intention, get the resources you need, get ready for what's to come with this new moon in Cancer. Because as we come into July, we are entering a very dramatic period of time, especially during the first 2 weeks of July. July is really when everything gets going. The month begins with Neptune stationing retrograde on July 4th. Neptune stationing always brings in an important influence. It's sometimes something that happens a little bit under the radar. It's not always as noticeable if you're not paying attention, but oftentimes big things do come in. And we absolutely know that big things will be happening in this first week of July with Neptune stationing because Uranus will enter Gemini on July 7th. That entrance of Uranus into Gemini, there really can't be enough said about this. I'll end up making another video going more into detail about this. But this is one of the things that as astrologers, we've all been waiting to see what would be happening. And it is going to definitely accelerate the winds of change streaming through collective and personal events. Then in the second week of July, Saturn will station, which is always a period of great drama and having to face reality in some ways, especially because this is Saturn stationing in Aries for the first time. We always get a sense of what Saturn is reckoning and shaping when Saturn stations. And so we will get big information here at this time. Then in the middle of July, around July 18th, Mercury will station retrograde, and we will have a 3 week period of Mercury retrograde that extends into August 11th. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically, you can think about mid July to mid August being this period of Mercury retrograde, which may bring in some delays. It may mean you have to kind of circle around and work through some things, but it doesn't mean you can't make forward progress. It doesn't mean you can't sign new deals or travel or anything else like that. But it does bring in this really intensified presence of Mercury. We'll talk more about that. Then in the final week of July, there is a very important new moon in Leo that's also combined with Mars and Venus coming into a critical turning point of their cycle, forming a square aspect. And the month will end with Mercury and the Sun forming a conjunction at 9 degrees of Leo. This will be a moment of clarification and important insight in the middle of this Mercury retrograde period. So, as I mentioned, the month will begin with Neptune stationing. This is an especially important stationing of Neptune because it's the first time Neptune has stationed in Aries. And it also means that although Saturn is getting ready to station, Saturn will continue to move slowly towards Neptune while Neptune is no longer moving. And so this is going to bring in a great intensification of the Saturn and Neptune conjunction. But keep in mind that Saturn and Neptune are not actually forming their conjunction here. So this could mean that some things that look like they might be happening may not fully come into fruition. This is actually one of my hopes about all the warfare that is breaking out. And as I'm talking right now, the President Trump of the USA was saying he'd give it about 2 weeks to decide if he wants to strike Iran or not. That 2 week period basically takes us right into this period of time we're looking at right here. So hopefully the fact that they don't actually come together means that, much more of a global warfare than is already happening does not erupt. But one thing that we, of course, do have to reckon with and be aware of that many astrologers have talked about for many, many decades. It's crazy all this is happening because for a very, very long time, astrologers have talked about this exact period of time being a time period in which the United States of America could enter into a great war. That's because the history of the USA with Uranus and Gemini, the history of the United States with the Revolutionary War began with Uranus and Gemini. The next time Uranus went into Gemini was during the time period of the United States being in the Civil War. And then when Uranus went into Gemini the next time, it was during World War II. And that entrance of Uranus into Gemini lined up pretty well with the timing of the United States of America entering World War II fully. Now, this does not mean that we have to have another civil war or another great world war, but clearly we have wars happening. The United States are implicated in these wars that are already going on in the United States. We also have a lot of violence being brought. There have been U.S. military personnel and National Guard brought in to address protests and civil unrest. And so we already have different elements of civil discord and global warfare already happening. Now, that is not the only thing, though, to keep in mind about Uranus and Gemini, but it is something for us to be aware of, and hopefully you can use that information to work for the change and the outcomes that you would really like to see happen. Now, Uranus and Gemini does not mean we are necessarily going to be entering some kind of massive global war. In fact, I think there are many astrological factors to suggest that we won't. But it does just show how high the stakes are and the importance of working for the change and the outcomes that you want to see happen in the world and using your voice. Now, on this chart, I'm showing the entrance of Uranus in Gemini set for Washington, D.C. What's really fascinating is that you can see that the north node of Uranus is very close to the ascendant when Uranus comes into Gemini. The reason Uranus in Gemini is so powerful is because its north node is in Gemini. And so this is a hypercharged Uranus whenever it comes into Gemini. And so while the United States of America does have a track record of being involved in great wars with Uranus and Gemini, there is so much more to the meaning of Uranus and Gemini, especially as we are in this new era of Jupiter and Saturn only forming conjunctions in the air element. And we have all this new technology and innovation taking shape right now because Gemini is perhaps the ultimate sign for Uranus to come into and bring invention and bring innovation. It is that home of Mercury. And so that ability of Mercury to question and synthesize and follow the trail of new ideas and research and bring things together and synthesize things and form these innovative inventions is incredible for Uranus. Plus, as I already mentioned, this is the north node of Uranus. And so this is an extreme place of growth and evolution for Uranus. And so there is just a huge list across time, everything from supersonic flight to mobile telephones to Big Bang terminology, to the first sound recordings, to the telegraph, to the printing revolution, to the telescope, to Darwin's ideas on evolution, to many of the philosophical ideas that formed the bedrock of the Revolutionary War in the United States, to the Declaration of Human Rights, to the formation of the International Red Cross. All of these things go with Uranus in Gemini. And we know that because we have such a powerful configuration set up with Pluto in Aquarius and Saturn and Neptune in Aries, that this entrance of Uranus into Gemini is going to massively accelerate the change coming through. So keep in mind again that while this is going to be this new burst of change in the season ahead, later in November, Uranus will move from Gemini back into Taurus, and we will go back to whatever the final lessons are for us with this long Uranus and Taurus transit we've been experiencing since 2018. Then next April in 2026, Uranus will come into Gemini and stay there at this point for the next 6 years into 2032. Then there'll be a little bit weaving in and out until we are finally done with this transit in May of 2033. So think about it. This is a big change coming in. This is an area of your life that is going to be forever changed by this movement of Uranus and Gemini. And we will just be getting an initial experience, an initial new movement into whatever this is going to mean for us in the next few months. And then, just as we are adjusting to this new change brought by Uranus and Gemini, Saturn will station retrograde in the middle of July. And this will bring some sort of reckoning with whatever is going on. And it is also going to dramatically intensify the potency of that Saturn and Neptune conjunction. And so, all of this together just means that these first 2 weeks of July are just something to be ready for. It's not something to be overly fearful about, but just to bring in awareness that things are going to be really changing and to do what you can to create some nice community for yourself, create moments of joy and pleasure and ways to ground and calm yourself, and also really try to open your mind to whatever type of awakening and new sources of inspiration you're coming into contact with. Because although this change will be really dramatic in the world, it really creates a possibility for breakthroughs in your own personal life. And so I hope you will be able to find that happening for yourself in July. And so the next big change happens after Saturn stations retrograde on July 13th. Mercury will station retrograde on July 18th, and this will bring in another very pivotal period of change. This Mercury retrograde period will stretch until August 11th, and the heart of it again will come at the very end of the month on July 31st. This could be a period for deep research and really digging into something. The one thing to keep in mind, of course, always with Mercury retrograde periods is sometimes we just have to loop around and return back to something, or something we're developing gets a little bit of delays, or something we have to rearrange. But it can be an incredibly powerful time to change habits. It can be an incredibly powerful time to let go of something that you've been attached to, or some sort of habit or pattern you've been playing out that's not in your best interest. Because there's so much breakthrough change happening in the world, I do think this Mercury retrograde is going to come in with the ability to help us come into relationship with what do we want to let go of, what do we want to change, and what do we want to open up to in this new era that's opening up. Soon after that, about a week after Mercury stations retrograde, there'll be two other major aspects that I want to talk about. One is the square aspect between Mars and Venus. This Mars Venus cycle is really important. It has so much to do with what we want to magnetize and create and go after in our life. It often has a lot to do with our personal relationships as well. All during the month of July, Mars in Virgo will be getting closer and closer to the south node of the moon. And right as this Venus Mars square is forming, Mars will be moving across that south node of the moon, which makes me think that this is, again, like I was just talking about with the Mercury retrograde that's beginning here, this could be a really good time for clearing things out and purging and breaking up old patterns that are things you want to change. There might be old relationship patterns you've had that you're coming into important realizations about and realizing how you want to change them. And so, because Venus is in Gemini, the sign of Mercury, and Mars is in Virgo, the sign of Mercury, this Mercury retrograde is going to be really important. And in the ways that Mercury retrograde can be helpful for going within and coming more into relationship with internal changes going on, I think that will be one way to work with this coming in here in the last week of July, especially as Mercury heads into that conjunction with the Sun on July 31st. This can be, though, a very powerful time to make changes in relationships, make some adjustments, and especially in terms of your path in life and what you're really focused on creating with your work. There's going to be some very important realizations coming in here about what needs to change, what needs to be modified to be more efficient, to be more effective. There is then going to be the next day a very powerful new moon in Leo that is opposite Pluto. So that's one reason it's really important. But it's also important because it is forming this powerful configuration with Uranus and Gemini and Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Next year, once Jupiter comes into Leo, Jupiter will be in this position, and there's going to be this very powerful configuration in the summer of 2026. And so we're getting some sort of foreshadowing about that here with this new moon. Plus, the area where the new moon is opposite Pluto, Mercury is going to retrograde back close to that degree. Mercury will station direct, not exactly opposite Pluto, but in range of being opposite Pluto. So there's all sorts of important foreshadowing and things coming in here with this new moon in Leo. Again, it looks like a period of very dramatic change. And then we enter the month of August. The month of August, especially the first couple of weeks, are really dominated by Mars coming into Libra and setting off a powerful configuration that involves Mars forming an opposition with Saturn and Neptune. In the middle of August, we will then have Mercury stationed direct. At the same time, Venus and Jupiter are coming together in a conjunction. The silver lining of August is that during those first 2 weeks of August that look to be very disruptive and combustible with great change. And unfortunately, this could be a period where we have some increased violence and difficult events going on in the world. There will also be a Venus Jupiter conjunction forming. And so this could turn out to be a way that even if things get difficult, there is going to be some kind of way to find inspiration, find support, find resources, find ways through this by really focusing in again on what it is that you do really want to create and bring into the world. And then at the end of August, on August 23rd, there will be a new moon in Virgo. This new moon is mostly important because there are going to be two new moons in Virgo, this one and then a solar eclipse in Virgo at the very end of this season. And so the Virgo area of your life is going to be supercharged. This entrance of Mars in Libra on August 6th is so important because Saturn and Neptune are in the sign of Mars in Aries. And the entrance of Mars in Libra signals that a couple days later, Mars will form an exact opposition with Saturn as well as Neptune. At the same time, Mars is forming an airy grand air triangle or a grand air trine with Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. Hopefully, we will not have the worst case scenario with this configuration in terms of really dramatic, destructive world events. But because as I keep mentioning, this is just a time period where we're going to be dealing with these big disruptions, with great destruction happening, because we are in this time of breakthroughs and incredible change. And so something is really going to likely come through very powerfully here with this configuration. We will need to be mindful of not trying to force something that just can't simply happen and instead be flexible and move and adapt as needed. Hopefully, because we do have some trines and sextiles here, we aren't going to have the type of large scale worst case scenario with current events happen here. So we'll just see what happens. The thing that's interesting, of course, as I mentioned, is that at the same time this is happening, we can see Venus and Jupiter coming together in a conjunction. And so while at the one hand, there's this very loud, powerful thing coming in, being activated by Mars, on the other hand, there's also something going on with Venus and Jupiter that can be all about very nurturing community and care and imagination and pleasure and artistry and inspiration. Then a few days later, Mercury will station direct. And so that's another reason this is just going to be a very volatile time period, because at the same time that Mars configuration is forming, Mercury is stationing. Mercury stationing always means it's a time to be especially mindful. And that is going to clearly be something we need to do here. However, Mercury stationing can also really bring in powerful new ideas and insights. And because that Mars configuration does have the potential to be innovative and bring in some breakthrough ideas. That's something that we certainly could be experiencing at this time with Mercury stationing direct. Then the next day, basically, as Mercury is stationing direct, Venus and Jupiter are coming together. Now, what I do hope is the silver lining of all of this is that Venus and Jupiter are the last ones to come together after whatever types of mayhem is brought by Mars in the first part of August. So hopefully this Venus Jupiter combination coming together here, both in collective events as well as in your personal life, could be some sort of balm or some sort of way of recovering or making repairs or reparations to whatever gets torn or whatever we need to mend. Then, as I mentioned, the month ends with this new moon in Virgo, which is mainly important because it is the first of two new moons in Virgo. There'll be one at the first degree of Virgo, and then there will be one later in September at the final degree of Virgo. And so, whatever you have in your natal chart in relation to Virgo is going to get a big renovation and a lot of change coming through here at this time. And because we have the South Node in Virgo, it might be something about letting go, releasing, and shedding something, coming into more of an essential sense of whatever is taking shape in that Virgo area of your life, kind of honing in on something there. Then the final stretch of the season is September. This is another period of great change, mainly because we have the eclipses come in, and these eclipses are powerful, but they're not just eclipses, they are eclipses happening in the same sign as Saturn and in the sign opposite Saturn, because Saturn will leave Aries and return to Pisces at the very beginning of the month. Then we will have a Pisces lunar eclipse that will be heading towards a conjunction with Saturn. And then we will have a solar eclipse in Virgo that is forming an opposition with Saturn. And as we come into that fall equinox time period, the other thing that's going to happen is Pluto is going to move out of bounds in southern declination. If you have not previously watched the YouTube video I did with Rosie Finn, who wrote this book, Persephone's Revolution, about Pluto moving in and out of bounds over time, I suggest that you watch that video. I can put a link below. But this is a big period of change coming in here because of Pluto going out of bounds in southern declination. And one of the reasons that I think we might have a sign of hope here relating to all of this, even if it's going to be very tumultuous and destructive at times, is that Rosie has tracked for many, 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 many centuries. She goes really far back in time, that Pluto going out of bounds in southern declination has much more of a track record of the people claiming power and reforms coming in. It is not a time period of those in power typically amassing more and more power, like we see people in power right now trying to do. That tends to happen more when Pluto goes out of bounds in northern declination. And so the combination of that happening at the same time as the solar eclipse in Virgo, solar eclipses also often go with people in power having some difficulties. We could see some important breakthrough changes that are sort of building across the summer season come in here and really build into something more momentous potentially. Saturn coming back into Pisces is a really big deal for one reason, because the Pisces area of your life is going to have its final Saturn lessons. You've already been dealing with that since March of 2023, but we're going to have a final return to whatever those Saturn lessons are. The other thing, though, is there's a much more harmonious relationship taking shape here between Jupiter and Cancer with Saturn and Pisces. Saturn and Pisces is in the home of Jupiter and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Plus, they're forming a flowing trine. So there is much greater support for Saturn in Pisces here than Saturn in Pisces previously experienced when Jupiter was in Gemini. And so, with whatever big changes in your life get unleashed in this summer, we have some sort of return here back into Pisces. And hopefully, that is going to bring in the ability to make the necessary adjustments to whatever those big changes are. And you will also want to notice what are some of these old Saturn and Pisces themes that might be showing up again. There might be something related to those old stories you have to return to and address in some way. Then we get this very powerful Pisces lunar eclipse on September 7th. That is in the same sign as Saturn. The one silver lining here, again, we have Jupiter. It keeps coming in as that silver lining. Hopefully, the fact that this Pisces lunar eclipse is forming an almost exact flowing trine aspect with Jupiter, the exalted lord of the eclipse. Hopefully that could bring in something positive here. But Jupiter is also forming a square aspect with Mars. And so, again, whatever's happening here, there's a lot of change coming through. And then we get this very powerful solar eclipse in Virgo at the final degree of Virgo, opposite Saturn and also opposite Neptune. This looks like one to just circle on your calendar in terms of big changes coming through in ways that hopefully will be positive for you. And there'll be some important new developments coming in. But I do feel like this one is a real wild card, and there will likely be big collective events, big movements coming in. This is Saturn and Neptune again, coming to the end of their cycle, being set off by this very powerful solar eclipse as we come into the Libra equinox. So it's a big turning of the season. There is a big, powerful eclipse coming in here. And again, it just goes with all of the dramatic changes that we're going to be experiencing. If you'd like to talk about the astrology that's happening in this season ahead, as well as the next year, my books are open for astrology consultations right now. I'll put a link below in this description. I'd love to work with you and talk about how to use all of this incredible change in empowering ways for yourself. I also have a webinar coming up on July 12th about working with fixed stars in astrology. I will be talking about how to work with both star parans as well as when planets or angles in your natal chart are forming close conjunctions with fixed stars. Paying attention to fixed stars and working with them can really open up new understanding and new dimension of your natal charts as well as the natal charts of other people you relate with or work with. And in this one, we're going to be focusing on stars that are associated with the planetary natures of Venus and Mercury. We'll be exploring Fomalhaut in the southern fish, Vega in the lyre, and Denevadigi, who is the tail of Cygnus the swan. These three stars are especially mystical and otherworldly. And because we are going to be going through such incredible change in the months ahead, I thought it would be interesting to work with these stars that have association with the other world and the imaginal dimension and can help us work with the changes coming in cunning and creative ways. So I hope you'll join me in this webinar. I'll put a link below in the description for you to sign up for it. I'm also going to be part of a free online summit in August, right in the heart of those great transits that I was just talking about. And this summit is going to be all about what I've been talking about. It's going to be all about all the great changes that are happening. And there's going to be this whole group of astrologers sharing presentations with you that you can get for free. Now, although it is free to sign up, if you want to have long-term access to the recordings, there is a charge to buy a ticket. And so I will put a link below for you to sign up for this. In addition to presentations for myself and all these other astrologers, there are also going to be some roundtable discussions involving the astrologers talking about the great changes happening in the collective. And that'll be a great opportunity for you to attend and ask questions and get involved in the discussion with us. So I'd also love to see you there. I'm also going to put a link below to my Patreon. I have an active Patreon community, and by signing up, you automatically get some discounts in working with me, as well as extra material that I share to my Patreon that I do not share elsewhere. There are also two higher tiers, each of which has a monthly class. And so if you're on the highest tier, there are two classes that happen every month that you can attend or watch the recordings of. And if you're on the middle tier, there is a monthly class in which we get together right after the new moon to talk about what's happening in the world and with transits in our personal life, and just being able to ask me any kind of question you want. So I'll put the link below to my Patreon so you can sign up for that as well. Finally, if you have not yet already liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do. It really does help me out. Well, that's it for now. I wish you the best in this season ahead, and I hope you enjoy that beautiful solstice sun.